What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're finally back with another System Crafters live stream. So let me know in the chat if you can see this, just making sure that my internet is actually working and the stream is live. While I wait for that, I'm going to say hello to Drishal, Valentino, Mark, David, Zell, Farron. I think there was someone else who sent a message way earlier before the stream ever started, and I forgot who it was. Sorry about that. Let me see. Hey, Pavel. Just double check on my stream panel here. Uh-oh. Buffering issues. Let's see, stream health. Poor. Seems fine to me. All right, hey, Jerry, the Seabass, Daigo, Ahmed. Nice to see everybody here today. I appreciate you joining after my 2-week absence. I've been, let's see, I've been on vacation, sort of half vacation really, I guess, because I've been making videos still, but I was in a small village in Greece for the last 2 weeks, and the internet there was like, maybe, if I'm lucky, 1 megabit downstream and like 0.2 megabit upstream, so it was just so slow, and there was so much packet loss and like low ping that there was just no way that I could do streams. But thankfully, now that I'm back in Athens, it's all working fine again. So hopefully during this stream we won't have any issues, because I see that the quality of the stream is not perfect, but we'll see what happens. So I'm very happy to be back to hang out with everybody. It's felt like a long time to me, even though I've made a couple videos since then, but it's nice to be able to come and have some fun on the Friday live stream. Another interesting thing that happened since the last stream, the last time we did a stream, I played the game Done It inside of Emacs. It's a text adventure game that's inside of Emacs. And after that stream was over, I heard from the author of Done It, and I think his name is Ronnie. Let me check the name in the documentation real quick, just so I won't get his name wrong. Yeah, Ron Schnell. So the author of Done It actually reached out to me and said he saw the stream, and that was pretty cool. Cool for him to reach out. He actually offered to join us the next time we play it, so that he can have a conversation with us about the game and sort of give us some tips here and there, which would be great, because I had some difficulty last time finding my way through some of the puzzles there. But that'd be really cool to have another person who worked on an Emacs package come and chat with us in the stream. It'd be great. Hi, Patricio and Horacio and Cateru. So for today's stream, I kind of want to just, get back into the swing of things by talking about another Emacs related topic. And that topic is, do we really need use package? So as you probably already know, use package is a pretty, I guess you could say, very commonly used package for writing one's Emacs configuration in a more concise way. And it provides a macro called use package, which is really no surprise, which removes some of the boilerplate code needed in Emacs configs. So I use this package and macro heavily in my own configuration, and I also use it in the Emacs from Scratch video series. So if you followed that series, you're probably using use package also, as are many other people in the Emacs community. Lately I've been experimenting with a different configuration, a new configuration that doesn't use package, which actually uses more sort of straightforward Emacs Lisp code. I'm not going to show that today because I'm not really ready to show it yet. I need to do a little bit more do a little bit more work on it first to make sure I get all the patterns figured out correctly. But I kind of like the freedom of not using use package. So I wanted to talk today about what use package actually gives us and how you could write a configuration that does basically the same thing without actually using use package. And why would you really want to do that? Well, I think we can talk about the pros and cons, or like the value that use package provides us, and also maybe the drawbacks of that, so that we have a better understanding of why somebody would decide maybe they didn't want to use package. I'll say this right now, and I'll say it again later probably. I'm not recommending that people stop using use package, but we were just sort of taking an opportunity to look at it with a more critical eye and see what we can learn from use package, and maybe see whether it's enough of a value add to actually use it for everything. So in my opinion, and also I want to say, if anyone has any opinions on any of these things while we're talking, just please feel free to interject in chat and I'll bring it up. So in my opinion, use package does provide some useful features. First of all, it can make your configuration appear to be more concise and well organized. And I say appear because whenever you see sort of side by side what it looks like whenever you've written use package code versus just plain Emacs Lisp code for a lot of the same configuration, it's not really that much more code to write it in just straightforward Emacs Lisp. There's some certain things that that use package will help make more concise, like setting key bindings or hooks, things like that. But I don't know that it's really like enough of a reduction in code size for it to be like a major improvement in conciseness in your own configuration. And in terms of being more well organized, definitely the way that you set up your configuration, where you have these expressions that have all the configuration for a particular package self-contained, it seems to be more well organized, but there may be like a downside to that as well, which we can talk about in a bit. Shabam asks, is this a clickbait? No, it's not a clickbait. I mean, it's definitely a pointed question to get you interested to know what the answer might be. Also, it can help you install external packages when necessary. One interesting thing about Package.el is that it doesn't actually provide a single function that you can call to ensure that a package is already installed. You have to check if the package is installed first and then call package install to install it if it's not already there. As far as I know, I think that if you call package install another time, it might try to install it again. We'll actually try to experiment with that for a bit to see whether that's true or not. But use package can take care of installing that for you, and also it has extensibility so that other systems like Straight.el can hook into that to do automatic package installation. But really, if you only have like a single line package install function, then it's not really necessary to have use package do that for you, or to require something like use package to do that for you. Also, streamline configuration of key bindings, hooks, faces, and custom variables. I mean, this is probably the place where people get the most value out of use package, is the more concise configuration for a little bit more complicated stuff like key bindings. Well, key bindings specifically, because you often have to do key bindings for multiple key maps inside of a package configuration. Hooks, you can go either way on that. Hooks aren't necessarily so complicated to configure, but it is a more concise syntax for sure with use package. Faces, I don't really use package for faces much, but it does have some ability to set faces using use package. Custom variables, there is a little bit of stuff going on behind the scenes with use package whenever you set custom variables using the :custom keyword, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. So it does have some value there. Also can set up autoloads for commands that don't already have them. We'll discuss this in a little bit more detail whenever I get to that part of the talk today. But that can be useful, but if you are using well-written packages that have their own autoloads already defined, then you shouldn't need this in practice. However, you can't really depend on every package to have autoloads set up correctly. And also, it makes your init.el look more like a configuration file syntax instead of just plain code, which you could say might be more beginner-friendly, but I actually have a perspective where it might not be more beginner-friendly because well, we'll talk about that in a second. And what else? Does anyone else have any other thoughts about what value use package brings to the table aside from what we've already mentioned here? Someone's got a car alarm going off outside. I don't know if you can hear that. Shabam says, your vids are always useful. Replace Council and Ivy with Consult and Vertigo. Never use most of the features of Council, etc. Minimalism is always nice. Yeah, it's nice to not have extra weight on things that you don't necessarily use. I like both Vertigo and Consult. I've been enjoying using those a lot more. Farron says, use package makes auto loading more concise. Yeah, that's true. That is one thing that it can do for you. You don't have to really think about requiring a package to load it up, because it already sets up auto loads for you in some cases, and it will require the package for you by default unless you tell it not to. Yeah, David says, I'm glad you're discussing use package, because in the Emacs from Scratch series, you didn't really discuss the purpose of use package. Yeah, there's a few things that I regret about the Emacs from Scratch series, and this is really one of them. When I started making that series, I was really just going off the cuff based on what I knew how to do in Emacs, just sort of sharing how I set up my own configuration. I want to do that over again at some point. I don't know if I would do the entire series over again, but to some degree, I'm going to do a new series on configuring Emacs that goes more from the basics and builds up more than what I did before, and also doesn't make so many mistakes along the way. So yeah, definitely regret not discussing more about use package, because the syntax requires some study a little bit before you understand how to use it effectively, and copying and pasting what I did in that series isn't necessarily the best way to learn that. Farron says, but you can still manually do everything. Yeah, that one thing about use package is it doesn't lock you into using use package for everything. You could use use package for specific packages and then use plain Emacs list for everything else, which is kind of nice. Patricio says, we can also talk about Quelpa too. I haven't really used Quelpa. I know that there's some benefits to Quelpa that are not in Straight or Package.el. So eventually I'll have to talk about that one, I think, to learn more about it. Hi, Martin. All right, so let's move on to the possible downsides of use package. So in my opinion, this is just my opinion, there are a few downsides to using use package. Apparently I did not finish that sentence. Maybe what I meant for is especially for new Emacs users. So one thing is that it obscures the underlying Emacs Lisp code for configuration by providing a different syntax that has to be learned. So after spending a lot of time making videos trying to teach Emacs to people, and also trying to teach Emacs Lisp, I see more and more the value of teaching people how to configure Emacs using the actual low-level, it really isn't low-level, it's like just the built-in functionality of Emacs for configuring Emacs, because through that you do start to learn the basics of Emacs Lisp. Before you ever try to write a function or a macro or a package, you're probably going to be writing Emacs Lisp to configure Emacs. So I think it's better to use that as a way to learn the syntax of Emacs Lisp, and also just the very basics of how to formulate expressions and use the tools in the box for evaluating code, and maybe seeing when errors occur and being able to diagnose errors. Whenever you have a layer like use package on top, you've got sort of like something that prevents you from seeing what that lower level stuff is. Now, obviously there's ways to see what use package is really doing, which I'm going to show you today, but as a new person coming to Emacs, you won't know to do that, and you won't really know what use package is really doing. So I feel like it is a drawback from that perspective. However, the flip side of that is that it might make it easier for people to get started with Emacs, because they don't feel so intimidated by writing Emacs Lisp code. But I feel like if you're going to invest yourself in using Emacs, you should probably get comfortable with the idea of writing Emacs Lisp early, because the majority of the power that you get from Emacs comes from actually writing your own Emacs Lisp and customizing the editor to do things that only you want it to do. I mean, like, you can't depend on third-party packages all day long. I mean, you can do a lot of things with third-party packages, but at some point you're going to start writing your own functionality to hook things together. So I feel like it's better to just go ahead and start doing that as early as possible. And I might start doing that in the Emacs Essentials series. I haven't really decided yet what the best way is to do that, but I want to start trying to teach configuration using the actual in-the-box configuration functionality, aside, not using use package, at least as the beginning way of teaching somebody how to do Emacs Lisp. Another thing is that it encourages you to cram all the configuration for a single package inside of one expression. This is sort of debatable whether this is a problem, but one thing that I did in my Emacs configuration, which is really stupid, I shouldn't have done it this way, but because I had a lot of my org mode configuration inside of one use package org expression, I actually split that across multiple org source blocks so that it kind of compiles the whole thing together. And if you feel like you're supposed to have everything in one big use package expression, you end up doing things that are not as efficient as you might do if you were able to just put pieces of configuration in the best place where they belong. So I kind of feel like it's definitely debatable, but I feel like maybe it's not great to sort of limit yourself to having things be inside of use package expressions for a single package. Pavel says, I use NoWeb as a workaround for the second thing. Yeah, definitely both of those, that and with eval after load, those are both good approaches. I actually did use eval after load for that in the Emacs from scratch config, which we will see in just a moment. Let me just check on the chat really quick. Pedro says, can you help me with one thing? Every time I open a file in Emacs, I get this message. File mode specification error, void function company TNG mode. Yep, I also had that problem, and the way that I fixed that is, so something in Evil collection is doing this. There is a variable you can set in your Evil collection configuration. If you set Evil collection company use TNG to nil, then that error will go away. And I'm guessing that this is you have Evil collection installed because this is the only time I ever saw that error, because I've never used TNG. I don't even know what that is. So I'm thinking that's a bug in Evil collection. So I had to set this variable to nil. Let me just paste that into the chat so that you can see that. All right, there we go. David says, I would like to see you do the series over again, next time going slower and discussing the purpose of each package that you installed. Yeah, so I did cram a lot of stuff into, wow, okay. Let me turn off open with mode here. I did cram a lot of stuff into the Emacs from scratch series. And as I started doing more focused series on specific things, like let's say Magit or any of the other packages I did more focused videos on, I decided that in the future, if I ever did something like Emacs from scratch over again, I would probably do more like a core configuration set of videos that did not pull in a whole bunch of packages, and then do more focused videos on configuring specific packages and using them. A lot of the videos that I'm doing on specific packages now, I'm talking about how to configure it anyway. So basically what you're seeing is my learning process of making videos. That first series, it worked because a lot of people, learned how to configure Emacs, but I think it probably did not teach well enough so that people were completely self-sufficient. So I would also like to do that over again and do a better job at it. Pavel says, everyone is going to Vertigo or Selectrum. I'm considering switching to Helm. Pavel, if you do that, I would be very interested to hear what your experience is with that and whether you like it better than Ivy, etc. Because I have not used Helm since probably 2014, I want to say. So I don't really have enough perspective on Helm to be able to speak confidently about it now. I would like to know what people think about Helm these days. Let's see. Elephant says, honestly, even as a programmer, jumping straight into configuration as opposed to just pulling packages was kind of overwhelming. I know not everyone feels this way, but I like the gradual start. No doubt that it's cool to do everything manually, though. Yeah. So are you saying that Emacs from scratch was more overwhelming the way it was done? Because maybe you're saying it's not. I'm not really sure. Hi, Pushkar. Let's see. Patricio says, I'm a GUIX XD user, and my problem is that many package creators only put the package configuration with use package, and in Geeks, I don't want to use package. Patricio, I also see the same thing. It's kind of, it's hit or miss. Some packages will only give you the use package config, and some packages will only give you a config that doesn't use package. So in either case, I feel like it's a downside, because if they focus on only using use package to convey how to configure their package, then people who don't use package have to sort of extrapolate, but probably they already know how to do that. So maybe it's not so bad. However, if you find a package that does not use an example of configuring it with use package, and you only know how to use package, you might be confused. So I don't know that it's I don't know that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it definitely is a concern that I have for people to learn how to configure packages. Let's see. So KHWPP says using use package is like forcing functional Java all the time instead of its imperative nature. Although it gives you an easy way to write your config, it masks the whole language. Yeah, definitely. Elephant says, I'm just saying that skeptical that a low-level approach is best. My early Lisp writing was very error-prone. Yeah, I would like to find a way to teach how to sort of gradually ramp up to writing Emacs Lisp. I mean, I did the Learning Emacs Lisp series, but I sort of treated that more like teaching a programming language rather than going from the sort of basic nuts and bolts of configuring Emacs and then building into the actual language discussion. So even that could be done better, I think. But, you know, over the years, as I keep doing this, I'm just going to keep redoing videos and do them better, because I'm sort of developing my own understanding of Emacs for teaching other people to use it, and that's very different than being a day-to-day user yourself. So I'm learning a lot about how to convey ideas about Emacs over time, and I would like to do a better job of it. So all this feedback that I'm getting right now, and also in the comments of videos and in Discord, etc., is really helpful for me to learn how to do this better. Yes, Elephant, I did a series called Learning Emacs Lisp. You can probably find it on the main System Crackers YouTube page. Hey, Dean. Okay, so back to the point here about downsides of use package. Init versus config is confusing to new users. Now, it may not be confusing to everyone, but it's not really clear on when you should use either of these. To answer that question for you right now, init is used for any parts of the configuration that should execute before loading the package after installing it. And then the config section is for anything that should be executed after the package gets loaded. Since use package takes care of loading the package for you automatically, the config section will only execute after that package gets loaded. And like I said, the last thing, harder to really understand when packages will be loaded. So by that, I mean that you kind of have to know how Emacs packages work a little bit as far as autoloads are concerned, and also when it's necessary to use something like the :commands keyword, or what :hook does, or even what :bind does, because all of those control when a package might get loaded. So not only that, there's also the :after, which will say that one package needs to be loaded after another. And there's also :defer, which may defer loading of a package until later. So you have to have this mental model of how all of the options to use package work. And if you don't really know all of that stuff, you might be confused about why a package isn't loading at a particular time. So that might also be splitting hairs a little bit, but I feel like, you know, for me trying to explain to someone else, I haven't made a video explaining use package like top to bottom yet, but if I did that, I would have to spend a lot of time explaining how certain things will make packages get loaded. So it's sort of, from my perspective, these are things that are kind of downsides for someone who's new to Emacs. And like I already said, I'm not recommending that people stop using use package. Use package actually has a lot of value, and it's more a matter of choice in the end about whether you feel like it gives enough value, or maybe you want to have a little bit more control over how things are done in your configuration, and you'd rather write it a different way. So really, it's just once you see what we do today, you can decide whether you want to use package or write things yourself, or maybe just experiment a little bit with doing it either way. And like I said also before, this conversation is mainly just an exercise to help us to think critically about what use package provides, and also look at the equivalent Emacs Lisp code. David says, in the EFS series, I wasn't talking about configuration, more like what is Ivy and why am I installing it? Yeah, so I think that my main motivation with Emacs from scratch at the time was, let me help you get from plain boring vanilla Emacs to a nice modern looking configuration as fast as possible without spending too much time explaining what a completion system is. So that I see the downsides of that now, but I think that for some people it is sort of useful because you can just get started pretty fast without having to think too much about it. On the other hand, if you wanted to do that, you could probably just use Doom Emacs instead. So I don't really know what the best thing was there, but hey, Tomas. Dr. J says, do you use Helm? And if you did, why do you prefer Ivy over Helm? I actually don't use Helm or Ivy. I use Vertigo at this point. Rotislav says, the problem with confusing init and config could be solved by, or at least heavily alleviated, just by using better names than those two. I do agree with that. I would say before load and after load probably would be better names that are much more obvious. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I can understand why it was named that way, because colon init basically means that when init.el gets executed, this code for this package will get executed, and colon config, that's a worse name because it doesn't really convey what it's doing, but really it means that whenever the package gets loaded, execute this configuration code. So I can understand why init was chosen, but I still think that it's not obvious enough to a person who doesn't really understand Emacs what it means. So I agree with you completely. Hey, Mark. Okay, so what does usePackage really do? So I mentioned before that usePackage is a macro, but what does that mean? So in Lisp languages, macros are very common. It's kind of one of the big benefits of using a Lisp. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I'm going to take more of a high-level approach to this because we really haven't talked about this in the Learning Emacs Lisp series yet. So let's stay high level here. A macro can be thought of as a code template, which is defined like a function, but it operates slightly differently. So whenever you define a macro, it's like defining a function, but instead, the arguments that you pass into that macro function when you call it are not actually evaluated at the time that you call it. They get passed in directly to the function. So it's almost like saying, when I call this function, give these little fragments of code to the function directly so that that function can insert them into a template and then evaluate that full realized template after everything has been finished. What that allows you to do is to take an expression like usePackage that has very specific syntax and then expand that into the actual real Emacs Lisp code that's necessary to affect the configuration that you're describing with usePackage. So we're not really going to go into detail about how macros work necessarily. We may try to write one a little bit later, but we're going to see how much time we have. The idea just being that usePackage is a macro. You can think of it like a code template. And what we're going to do is expand these usePackage code templates to understand what it's actually doing on the inside. Dr. J, I already did a video on Vertigo. You should check out, maybe it was, like 2 months ago? Just scan back in my history of videos and you'll see the video on Vertigo. Patricio says, I'm not a new user on Emacs, but I don't understand the difference between init and config. Yeah, that's basically the problem. Nasser says, using usePackage is good for organizing your config. Before usePackage, it was very common, people declaring init.el bankruptcy. Yeah, but people still do that though, because even with usePackage, I think people's configurations get too complicated and they have a lot of stuff in there they're not really using. So people will just start over on their configuration probably once every 2 to 5 years, I would say. I'm already starting a little bit of like a redo completely because I have some new ideas on how I want to do things. But yeah, I think that init.el bankruptcy is inevitable for any Emacs user. If you have used the same Emacs configuration for many years, then you must have done some things perfectly whenever you set up your config the first time. Okay, so there's a really cool command in Emacs called Emacs Lisp macro expand, which is for this purpose, where you can put your cursor on an Emacs Lisp expression, and if it actually represents a macro call, it will expand that macro call in line in the document so that you can see what that macro actually did, and you can examine the output. So what we're going to do is go through a bunch of usePackage expressions and then look at the output of the macro to understand what usePackage is really doing. SPFab says, are there any benefits macro have over functions? Well, a function takes the evaluated form of the inputs you provide it. So it's really too deep of a discussion to get into right now. But if you have the addition function like add, and you pass two expressions that are also mathematical expressions, If it's a function, then everything will be evaluated before it gets passed into the add function. If it's a macro, those sub-expressions will not get evaluated before being passed into add, and it's not really meant for the same kind of thing. It's not meant for computation. It's meant for templating code, basically. Hi, Ulrich. You're not that late. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the Emacs from scratch configuration. I'm gonna go through a lot of those use package expressions there and expand them so we can see what a lot of these keywords for use package are actually doing. Hey, Joseph, you're not that late. So we're gonna look at a few of the features here, and I'm just keeping this list as a reminder to myself of what things we wanna see before we finally finish this up, because there's a lot of different keywords that have some functionality that we need to examine so we can see how to map that into actual just plain Emacs Lisp code. Elephant says macros are like meta functions. The macro is used to generate code that is then evaluated. Yes, that's a very concise way to put it. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the Emacs from scratch configuration. This is a separate Emacs instance that I'm gonna be using here. And we're just gonna go through and try to evaluate some of these use package expressions. Nice little jingle there, Pavel. I like that. Ashra says, is there a difference in the outputs of pp macro expand last s expression and Emacs Lisp macro expand? I'm guessing that pp macro expand actually writes it to the message buffer, and the Emacs Lisp macro expand function actually takes the output and drops it directly in the buffer. It replaces the previous expression inside of the buffer. I can try it and see what happens. Matthew says, I'm about to declare bankruptcy again, and I've been using use package for 4 years. Yeah, honestly, redoing your Emacs configuration is actually one of those things like maintaining a Zen garden. Some people do it just to get the sense of satisfaction of cleaning things up. Even if you have a really nicely organized configuration like Matthew has, like Angry Bacon has. His configuration is very nice. We actually looked at that on .file detective the first time we did .file detective. So even someone who has a very nice configuration will eventually decide they want to redo their configuration just because, I don't know, it's a fun way to spend time writing code and rethinking things a little bit, and maybe getting a better result out of it. So I don't know. It's just part of the the process of using Emacs, in my opinion. Hey, GK Sudo, he says, is this relevant for those using use package with Straight.el? Yes, because I'm actually going to use Straight.el in this case to simplify something. So let's see how it goes for a second, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. All right, so now I'm going to kind of drop down to a place where we have use package here. I should say that the version of the Emacs from scratch config I'm using right now is actually the one that I modified for the Straight.el episode. I took Package.el out. I'm using Straight.el here. I'm doing that because I prefer using straight use package for installing packages, but we're still going to try to use Package.el as well to see what the differences might be between those two. Hey, Anton. All right, so we're going to jump down to the first instance of use package. On this one, I'm actually not going to expand this one because this is not a package that we will use anyway. I've got this disabled because it's actually for auto-updating packages using Package.el. So we're just going to skip this one. However, the first one we're going to look at is actually a really good example, because what we need to see here is what actually happens for just a plain use package expression that just mentions the name of the package and doesn't do anything else. So like I mentioned before, I'm going to run this Emacs Lisp macro expand function. And when I do that, into file during parsing. Okay, let me put it right there and do that. Okay, I need to set, let's see, toggle keyboard. There we go. Let's do it one more time. All right. Emacs macro, Lisp macro expand. So now that one line expression got expanded into a number of lines here. And the topmost thing in this expression is a prog-in. And if you watched the Learning Emacs Lisp series, we briefly covered what prog-in means. But for those of you who haven't seen that yet, prog-in is a sort of a catch-all function that says, inside of this expression, there's going to be a lot more expressions. Evaluate those in order and return the value of the last expression in this list. And this is typically used in cases where you have some form in your Lisp code that expects to only take one expression, like the first path of the if expression. So prog in here doesn't mean anything really that special. You can sort of just ignore that. It's really more of a structural thing for Lisp, so that when you call use package, you can call it in certain contexts where only a single expression is expected, even though there's multiple expressions being executed here. So I just wanted to say what that means. Now you can just forget everything I said and just ignore the fact that you see prog in here. So now what we see here, the first thing we see here is it calls straight use package, no littering. And that's because I've got the configuration for use package set up to automatically install packages with Straight.el by default. So because we have that use package expression with a package name, the integration of Straight.el into use package is causing the package to be installed if it's not there already. Let me think for 1 second. So if I turn that integration off, what you would see is that it would try to check if the package is installed using Package.el and then install it instead. But since straight use package does that check sort of internally, we only have a single expression that's needed for that. Now, the next thing is it defines a variable, use package -- warning 43. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what does that mean? I think that what's happening here is it's creating a function that's used later to basically write out an error whenever something goes wrong while loading the package. So the reason why this is being written out and stored in this funky variable is that the name of the package is being stored in this format expression. So it's basically just storing metadata about the package that's being loaded, so that whenever an error does occur, that context is retained, and then it can write out what the package is that had the error while loading. It is a little bit weird to see this here, and this is sort of, a lot of times whenever you have macros, a lot of this intermediate stuff will be used to hide some of that behavior that you're sort of getting for free, but really there is code that is involved there. So this thing obviously is not necessary if you're writing your configuration out yourself. So we've already seen this block of code here that's not needed, and this piece here that's not needed. So if I were to just delete those, then we're already down to a lot less code at this point. The next thing is this condition case unless debug. We haven't talked about this at all in the Emacs Lisp series, but really what this function does, is this a function? Let's see, Control-H-O. Okay, it is a macro itself. So this is a macro that simplifies error handling. So what we're doing here is saying that if the debugger is currently turned on in Emacs, we'll just let the debugger take care of handling an error. Otherwise, this function here, or this code here, will dictate how the error gets handled at load time. All this stuff is really boring, but I want to just get this out of the way so we can focus on the actual meat and potatoes in a little bit. So here we have this error. This is where the error is being caught, and we're using funcall to call that weird warning 43 function that was defined before. Actually, it's a variable with a lambda function assigned to it. So there's basically just this wrapper around the actual code for loading and configuring the package that takes care of handling errors if anything goes wrong. So we can actually delete this part of the code as well, because we don't need any of that. So if we get down to the bare minimum, we're left with just this part here. So all we're doing is checking if the package is installed and installing it if it's not already installed, which is part of what use packages does for you, and then requiring the package to make sure that it's loaded. This require expression here has a couple extra parameters that are added, basically to say don't show any errors whenever the package doesn't exist. Actually just return nil instead. And part of that is so that use package can then tell you if it's not installed in a different way than just having an error get popped up, because it's really annoying for errors to be popped up all the time. I think it probably just ignores it. So let's see. Let me just pull up the docs for this function really quickly. So Control-H-F. We're going to pull up the require function. So the first parameter is the feature name, which is no littering in this case. And then the second parameter is file name, and it says if file name is omitted, the print name of feature is used as a file name. So we're basically saying we don't care what the actual file name is. We're loading a feature that should be we're loading a feature that should already be known in the Emacs load path. The third parameter is one for no error. So if it's set to true, then it will return nil instead of signaling an error. So basically, if the package is not found, don't signal an error, just don't do anything at that case. So we don't really need that because we would rather just have Emacs tell us if there's any problem when loading the package. So now we can just boil this down to 2 lines. So instead of having that one use package line that has no littering in it, now we have 2 lines. However, I don't think this is a major problem necessary because in some cases you probably don't even want to have a require for a package yet. You might want to depend on an autoload in the package so that when a particular function gets called, then the package gets required. So in the case of no littering, we definitely want to have the require here. But for some packages, you actually won't have a require directly in line. So you may only just install the package and then set up some other configuration later. So this is one of those cases where for this specific package, there's more code that results from using raw Emacs list as opposed to use package, but then in other cases, you might end up with less code. So it really just depends on which package you're configuring at any given point. All right, let's see. So Nasser says, use package expand minimally is a good variable to play with. That's interesting. I didn't know about that one. Anton says, I'm a dumb C programmer. All my code covered with lets and prog-ends. Well, lets are pretty common in Lisp, in my opinion. Elephant says, is it some C++ name mangling thing? I think in this case, it's not. It's more like use package is probably keeping a counter for all the times that a error handler function has been defined. It could be that there's like a gensym function or something in Emacs Lisp that's causing that. Let's see, gensym. Does it just give a... Okay, yeah, so gensym is a different thing. So probably they're just keeping their own counter there, but there is a way to have like a mangled name that if you want to have it generated. Jay is basically saying he wants someone to make a website for his business. I don't know. I don't know why you would show up here asking for that because we're not really talking about making websites. So definitely, I can't really help you there. Hey, Alex. Okay, GK Soda says, interested to see how inits and hooks are called from outside of use package. Yeah, we're going to see that in a little bit. So let's move on to the next example here. So we have general.el, which is a package for making it easier to set up certain types of key bindings, usually with leader keys. We're not really going to look into general itself, but we're going to look at how this bit of configuration gets expanded after we do a macro expand on it. So see you, Jay. Sorry we couldn't help you. So on this use package general expression, the only 2 things that it's doing that's different than what we saw before is using the after keyword and also using the config keyword. So we will see how config gets expanded now. I'm going to drop the cursor right here and then run the... Well, actually, let's do one thing first. I want to try out what Nasser recommended. So we'll look at the variable use package expand minimally. So if non-nil, make the expanded code as minimal as possible. So capturing of load errors, conditional loading of packages. Okay, so that sounds like a good thing to do. So since we've already seen the more ugly output of use package, let's actually try that because it might be helpful to get to just the heart of what we are looking for. So I'm going to use setq use package expand minimally t. All right, cool. So now we got that set up. Do I have keycast here? No. So now we will go to the use package general expression and then call Emacs list macro expand. Cool. So now what we see is a much simpler output, which is good. And the 2 things we see are straight use package general, which we expect to see because we have to make sure that the package is installed. And we see this eval after load for the evil package. So with general, we had the colon after keyword with evil. So what we're saying with that is we want general to be loaded after evil gets loaded. And eval after load is basically the way that you do that. Either eval after load or with eval after load. I think eval after load is a function. Yeah, it's a function. And there's also with eval after load, which is a macro, which basically just calls the function, but makes it so you don't have to use symbols for everything. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to delete the prog-in. I will delete the ending parentheses there. I'll move this code over a little bit. Okay, I don't want to get into too much. Here, let's do this instead. I'm going to use edit special and fix the indentation on these. Come on, man. All right, so indent. Whatever. Indentation is not working right now, so let's just go back to that. I think that's going to work. Okay, so what we have here is eval after load. We're passing in eval as a symbol. We're also passing in the prog-in for all the internal expressions as a symbol. But I'm going to change this to use with eval after load because it's actually easier to write it with eval after load. And I'm going to take the symbol off of this because since it's a macro, we can pass symbols in directly to the macro function without having to quote them. It's a whole other thing that we don't really need to talk about right now, but basically, when you use macros, a lot of the things that you might have to do before whenever you're referring to a type of expression in Emacs or in Lisp, you don't have to do that anymore. So we're able to basically take these single quotes off of the expressions. Now, let me just drop some of these back. Okay, so we also don't need this prog-in because I think that with eval after load is implicitly a prog-in, so we can get rid of that as well. And now we have a much more simple representation of what the use package would have written out, basically. So we're checking to see if general is already installed and installing it if not. And then we're also saying that after the package eval gets loaded, and we haven't loaded eval yet, we haven't gotten to that part of the config because it's actually right here after this block of code. When we say with eval after load eval, then anything inside of this expression will get executed after eval gets finished loading. So at that time, we're saying require general, and we don't have to have these two nils here. We can just say require general. And then all of this is actually part of the :config block that I wrote myself inside of the original expression. I probably should be copying these so you can see them side by side. So basically, all the code that we see here is the code that we had in that expression itself. So really, I think that we don't have many more lines of what we already had before. In fact, I think this last T, we could probably get rid of that because it's just there to return a value from the end of the prog-in. So at this point, we basically just have a couple extra lines that represent the loading of the package, or not even the loading of the package, the installation of the package, and then eventually the. I'm listening to see if my music is still playing. It sounds like it's not. The requiring of the package, which loads it after loading eval, and then the using of the functions from the actual package. Man, why has music stopped playing? Let's see, proc.ed, MPV. Interesting. So let's check some questions from chat really quick because I saw a few come through. Let's see. Matto says, for the differences between use package and leaf, much simpler and cleaner code base. Yeah, so Matto and I have been talking about another alternative to use package called leaf. We've been talking about it in the Discord, and it's also come up in the System Crafters IRC chat as well. They look similar, so I haven't really prepared to talk about them at all, but we can look at that a little bit later, I think. Hey, Bash Script. Matto also says, for my personal grievances, hook is weird and doesn't let you use Emacs' own add remove hook mechanism. I agree. And you don't get to know this hook basically exists for Emacs built-in tool. Custom and use package is weird and has weird syntax. Yes, I agree. Abadan says, I was having issues with indentation myself earlier. You can use org edit source exit to edit your code block in a separate buffer. Yeah, I was doing that. It wasn't really working perfectly for me either. Radislav says, manual code indentation, favorite pastime activity of any Lisp programmer. It's actually easier for me now with the Lispy package, but I don't have that set up in the Emacs from scratch config. Matto says, Leaf is not really a wrapper, but more of a front end to Emacs' own mechanisms. I need to look at it a little bit more closely because it doesn't look that much different to me than than use package. But that's just my surface level understanding by looking at the repo. Pavel says, so it doesn't check for package loading error with use package expand minimally, but still passes nil to require, so a loading error won't show up. Actually, in this case, passing nil does make the error show up. Passing t makes it not show up. So it's kind of weird that they write it out that way, but it's probably because they're sharing code between the two cases, and they just write it out the same way for both cases. Let's see. Let me actually, did I turn off open with mode before? I forgot to turn off Discord. Sorry, Pitta. Okay, so that's it for the general expression here. It's really nagging me here that the music stopped playing. Let me see if I can start that again. It's going to be loud at first. Sorry for that. If it works. So, proced, MPV, kill it. Wow. No, don't do that. Okay. Let me make sure I didn't break anything. Seems fine. Patricio says, do you use EXWM with Polybar? Yes, I actually have a video about that. If you search my videos for Polybar, you're going to find it. And I explain how I use it. Okay, time to go to the shell. P kill MPV. Let's see if I'm going to break my stream by doing this. Not working. Okay, whatever. Let's just keep going. Okay, so next example, the evil package. So this has a bit more configuration. We also now see init for the first time in one of these examples where we expand it. We have init and we have config, and that's everything for that one. So let's go here and let me copy this config so we can see it side by side. I'm going to copy this whole expression here and then drop it down below. And then I'm going to run the Emacs Lisp macro expand. And now we have a prog in, and obviously we're going to start with straight use package evil. And now you see that the set queues that I was doing in the init expression, or the init keyword, that part of the configuration, actually get dropped in right before the require call. So this is what I was saying before, that the :init section of your use package expressions gets executed before the package gets loaded. And in this case, since the evil package is not being deferred, or the loading of it isn't being delayed by either saying defer or using command or key bind or hook, it gets loaded automatically. Another example where I'm saying that it's not easy to know when the package is going to get loaded based on what you write in your use package expressions, because in this case, it gets loaded automatically whenever you don't really know that it would be loaded automatically. So we see that we have those 4 set queue expressions. We also see the require of evil, which we expect to see because use package will put that in there at some point. And then we have the code for the configure block. So here we see evil mode 1 comes right after configure. And because the package is getting loaded immediately, it just automatically writes out all that code immediately after the require statement. We're not doing that with eval after load thing because we're not deferring the load of the package until later. So this is actually a lot simpler than what you would see with other packages, because there's no deferring of loading. So basically, if you wanted to make this be like the just plain Emacs Lisp configuration, what you could do is just effectively have your loading of the package, your installation of the package, ensuring that it's installed, your pre-load configuration variable setting, your actual require to load the package, and then anything that you want to do after that. Now, these defining keys, I actually wrote them myself in the configuration, so we're not looking at a bind expression yet, but you do see that everything is represented here, and the number of lines is almost the same, I would say. And you're not really losing anything because it all looks the same. And it seems a little bit more straightforward now because you're just looking at imperative code executed line by line. There's no magic about how this is being executed. This is, as you read it, the order that you're reading it gets executed. So that is how you would do the evil package with without use package. So I'll just go ahead and delete this piece here as well. So now the next thing, let's see. Evil collection. I mean, this is basically, there's no real surprise here. We have a config block. We can take a look at that really quick. I think we actually saw a package like this before. So if I run that macro expand, we just end up with the same kind of prog in, and then we can just change that to with eval after load, evil, delete that prog in, and then just tab all this stuff over, and that's the effective the effective configuration of that same block. So not really different in terms of size. And we are using with eval after load so that evil collection gets loaded after evil gets loaded. And we can also delete these two nils as well. So that's a few things that was kind of useful to see. Let's see what else we have in here. Use package. Here is the first example of a use package expression that uses the commands keyword. And if you don't know what that does, basically it says that in the command log mode package, there is a command called command log mode, which is probably going to be the one that turns that mode on. And what you're saying is, I want to defer the loading of the command log mode package until someone executes command log mode. Typically, an Emacs list package is going to have an autoload set up for this already, but use package doesn't know that by default. If you wanted to use the autoload from the command log mode package, you would typically just use defer, and then I think that's basically it. You just defer it so that it gets loaded later. I don't know if you need a T here, maybe. And then the autoload will take over with that. So let me just explain what an autoload is really quickly. In fact, we can look at command log mode and see. It should have that. Yes. Okay, so in Emacs Lisp code, if you define functions and commands, you can have this syntax right on the top of the definition. It looks kind of funky, but this is special, and Emacs understands this to say this is an auto load. And what this does is that whenever Emacs does the initial parsing of this file to understand what's in it, it won't actually load these things into memory yet. Maybe it does a pre-parsing of it. I'm not exactly sure what the sequence of operations is there, but what it knows is that there is a function that we're defining. Ultimately, there's a minor mode that's being defined that has a command associated with it. So apparently, autoload can be somehow applied to that command. I don't really know how we can get into that right now. But basically, what we're saying is that the command log mode command that's being defined in Emacs, whenever it's going to define that function, even though the function hasn't been loaded yet. And then when you call it, it will cause the package to get loaded and then execute the real function. So it's just a way for you to defer loading of a package until you actually try to run something from that package. But if you have to actually set this auto load line on a function inside of an Emacs list package before you get that functionality, because it doesn't work otherwise. You have to manually load the package otherwise. Now, going back to what we were looking at before, let's say that the command log mode command doesn't actually have an auto load set on it. You can use this commands keyword to say, I want to generate an autoload for the command log mode function or command. And then at the time that gets executed, I want to finish the rest of the initialization process for this package from the use package expression that we have here. I know there's a lot of information. I'm sorry if that sort of is overwhelming. Ask questions in the chat if you want more information about that. All right, I'm going to expand this, or in fact, let me just copy this code really quickly, and then I'll expand it. Okay, so now what we see here is we have a very simple output, which is good. Same old straight use package. And now what we see is there is an unless expression. Let me bring this back up to the previous line to make it clearer. We're going to use the fbound_p function, which basically is a function that says, is there a function with this name defined? It's looking for the command log mode function. So if the function is not currently defined, which probably means the package has not been loaded yet, we're going to call autoload to add an autoload. This is actually how you programmatically set up an autoload. You say autoload, and then command log mode is the function that we're doing. And then I think this is the name of the package. So command log mode is the name of the package. And then there's a couple more parameters. Let's actually look at the documentation for that. So the first two are function and file. So we see function is command log mode. And then the second one is the file, which is command log mode.el, effectively. The doc string, which we don't really care about. And then interactive T. So I think it's basically saying this is expected to be an interactive function or a command, basically. So you would set that to T if you expect it to be a command. And since we say commands here, we're sort of implying this is actually going to be a command. So whenever use package creates the autoload, it says, yes, this is a command. So since there isn't anything else in this use package expression, it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. But what if we actually added something in? So maybe if I go in and add a config block, config, and say message, what's this do? Oh, wow. Okay, let me just type this in. All right, so what's this do? All right, so now if I were to expand this block instead, then what we'll see is that now there's also an eval after load that's being added. And it's basically just waiting for this command log mode command to be executed so that the so that the eval after load expression will then be triggered because the autoload causes the command log mode package to be loaded. A lot of sequencing there, but if you needed to do this, which I hope that you don't need to do this. I hope you don't need to manually set up autoloads, but sometimes there are going to be older packages that don't have autoloads, or maybe you're using a package written by someone who doesn't really know about autoloads yet, so they don't have any set up. I raise my hand because I haven't done this yet with the .crafter package, but that's only because we haven't gotten to that point of the series yet. But hopefully you don't have to do this in most cases. Only you would have to do this whenever the package does not set up autoloads correctly. So basically, what you see right here is probably enough. Having this unless fbound p bit is actually kind of helpful just to ensure that you're not going to set up an autoload whenever the function is already loaded. I don't know if it will throw an error in that case. Maybe it does. But you could probably get away with just taking it out if you know exactly what the order of things would be loaded in your configuration, which sometimes you may not know for sure, but if you feel pretty confident, then you can just, call autoload directly. But like I was saying, I hope that you don't have to do that ever. Let me answer some questions really quickly here. Let's see. Shabam says, how did you get org code into an elisp buffer? It's actually the other way around. We have elisp code in an org buffer. Let's see. Drashal says in MPV, you can use save position on quit to keep the volume the same as before and resume it where you quit. I actually have MPV automated a little bit so I can kind of do the intro of my stream, and I have to make the volume go down. So I don't really want to set that up because I don't want to screw up my script. Let's see. Hey, B. Kaczynski. Let's see. Matto says, that's because ELISP is mostly a standalone programming language derived from Lisp and has been influenced over the years by Common Lisp. Yeah, it definitely has been. Let's see. What else? Matto says, we can definitely talk about Leaf in more detail later. I might do a video on it at some point once I understand it better, because right now I probably won't be able to do it justice. Anton says, this is what actually wonders me. It looks imperative style code, but in Straight.el, it's written that it's purely functional package manager. Does this mean that all set queues will be reversed? No. So a functional package manager is more in terms of how packages are installed in a quote unquote immutable way. It doesn't actually relate to the actual code that you're executing in your Emacs configuration. Tomas says it's exciting, not overwhelming. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Pavel says, file has to be in Emacs load path, so you can't have two different files with the same name in two different packages. Yes. I don't know what will happen if you have two files with the same name in your Emacs load path. I would guess that it probably picks up the first one it finds with that name whenever you're referring to it by name. This has to be a problem that that would come up. All right, let's see. That's all for that. Okay, so on Doom themes, not really anything special here because it's just in the init. We've already seen that before, so we'll skip that one for now. Okay, so here with Doom mode line, we have our first instance of custom. I'm hoping that it writes out the custom variable setting the way that I expect it to with this variable set, because it is pretty interesting how they go about this. What in the hell, man? I don't know if you can hear that, but there is some really loud buzzing noise happening at the moment. Let me turn this air conditioner off. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Okay, we really need that background music to cover up all the ambient noise that's going on in this house right now, because there's a little bit too much screaming in the background if you can't hear it. Yeah, you heard that. That's great. Let me see if I can get the music playing again, because this is really annoying. So let me see if stop music. How about that? Start music. Please play. Not working. And is MPV running? P grep MPV, P kill MPV. Okay. Stop music. Start music. Still not working. Okay. I guess we're gonna live without it. No big deal. Actually, I could do this. How about does this still work? Hey, how about that? Let's do this. Maybe a little bit loud at first. Oh, you know what? I think that something happened with Pulse Audio. Sync. Select by name. Let's hope this doesn't break the stream. Didn't seem to do anything. Okay. Desktop audio is broken. Cool. Back to it. Sorry for the delay there. Jerry says, I have a highway providing my own background noise. Yeah. That's the great thing about living in a highly populated area is you got all kinds of noise. Yeah, Pulse Audio moment indeed. Okay, so let's expand this Doom mode line here, because this is going to get interesting, I think. So macro expand. Now, what we see here is the same old pattern that we've seen before with straight use package. However, one new thing that we're seeing here is something that I find quite curious, because there's supposed to be a different way to do this in Emacs, and I don't know why they don't use it. There must be a reason. So instead of what I would expect to do, which I'll show that in a minute, they're actually creating a theme for use package. And you probably haven't seen the video I did about creating your own custom theme in Emacs, but what a theme actually is in Emacs isn't like a color theme. It's actually a collection of variables that can be set whenever you apply a theme. So what's happening here is that a theme is being defined for use package, and also it's checking to see if it isn't already defined first, and then it's defining the theme, then turning the theme on, and then it's setting variables on that theme, and it's setting the variables that I told it to set using that custom keyword. So because they set custom -- inhibit theme enable to nil here, basically what that means is that whenever custom theme set variables is called, it's automatically setting the value of those custom variables at that time. So to actually set the value of a custom variable, it's doing all this weird stuff. And I'm guessing that there must be some weird edge case about in Emacs for setting custom variables programmatically that they had to do it this way. However, there is a function, I think it's a function, called custom set variables. And I think it's supposed to take care of this for us without having to do all the weird theme stuff. So we could try to see if that works. I don't know if it's really going to work or not. But it would allow us to get rid of a lot of the stuff in the middle here. So let me try this. Apparently, you can set multiple variables using this expression. I think that it's just a list of lists. So we can try to do that here. What I'm going to do is get rid of some of this extra stuff we don't need. Get rid of all of that. And then here, let's see, custom set variables and Doom mode line height. And since this is a function, right? Yeah, it's a function. So I'm going to have to use a, whoever is asking me to answer them, you don't have a name, so I can't refer to you by name. But yes, I see your messages. So Doom mode line height, 15, and that's that. So I think that it would probably be done like this. Let me actually, let's change this to 20. I don't know. All right, so invalid function. Okay, that's interesting. Why would it be a function? Oh, because I didn't do this as a whole symbol list. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so what is the value of Doom mode line height now? 20. Okay, so it did actually work, it seems. So now if I get rid of that part, now we're back to having a much more clear way to set the custom variables here. And I think that you can basically set multiple of these. What else do we have from Doom mode line? So Doom mode line IRC, I can set that to nil. Let's try that. So I'll copy this line, and then Doom mode line IRC, I'll set that to nil instead. And then I will execute that really quickly and then see what the value of Doom mode line IRC is. And that's now nil. So I don't know why use package is not using custom set variables instead, but clearly it works. And it's not that bad. I mean, it's pretty close to what you would use in the actual custom keyword parameter instead of use package. So I don't know, it seems doable here. I don't know if there's anything that's a downside, but it's probably something you would figure out pretty fast if you end up having the problem. Let's see. Pavel says, I think use package does this because whenever you were changing custom variables via customized buffers, whenever you were saving them, it would save all the variables set with custom set variables. That's a very interesting way to put it. Yeah, I think you're right about that, Pavel. So what Pavel is saying is that because use packages is creating a theme to set the variables in, it doesn't actually save those into the custom file after the customized view is used to set values in other parts of Emacs. So I can see how that would be a problem if you had these variables being set inside of your custom file, but maybe it's not a big deal, especially if you don't actually use the custom file. Like I kind of just send it to a temp file that doesn't get checked in. So maybe it's not a problem if you don't really depend on checking in the custom file into your .files repo. But I would have to experiment with that a little bit more to make sure that that's the right way to do it. It's another thing that could be hidden behind its own custom macro that doesn't require all of use package to do all that same stuff. All right, so everything else is just boilerplate. We're saying Doom mode line mode. Now, the funny thing here is in this configuration, I actually did something really dumb. I'm calling Doom mode line mode in the init part of this expression, which works because there's an autoload set for Doom mode line mode. But I should have done that in the custom section, I think. So that's really just a mistake on my part when I wrote this configuration. A lot of what you see in the Emacs from scratch config is me copying things over from my own configuration. And even at that point in time, I did not know as much as I know now about Emacs config. So there's some mistakes that are in there for sure. All right, so let's move on to the next one here. What else do we have? I'll close that, save this. All right, so now we have the which key package, which has our first use of defer. And we also have diminish here, which there's an integration for this in use package, but it's not one of it's not one of the mainline parameters to use package, in my opinion. This is sort of like an integration that exists that you don't really have to use. So we're not really going to pay too much attention to that one, but we do want to see what defer does in this case. So I'm going to copy this expression, if I copied it all, and then run Emacs list macro expand. And same old use straight use package. Now we see this run with idle timer. And let's take a look at what this function actually does. So this function accepts a number of seconds, a Boolean basically for repeating the timer or not, and then the function to be called, and then a list of arguments to pass to that function that gets called. So what this means is that when you call run with idle timer, it's going to wait for some number of seconds after Emacs has become idle. So basically after your init.el file completes loading and any other code that's loading as a result of other things loading gets finished loading and Emacs is finally idle and there's nothing else to be done, then it's going to wait for this specified amount of time before calling this function. So in this case where we have defer 0, what that's saying is we're going to call run with idle timer with a second count of 0, which basically just says after everything's finished and once Emacs is idle, just immediately call this function, which is the which key function. Now, if I were to put defer to 5, 10, whatever, it would use that value in the run with idle timer. So you probably didn't know about this function. I actually didn't know about this specific one. I know about run at time, which is very similar, but this one is more specifically about running something after a certain amount of idle time. And this can be useful whenever you're doing your Emacs configuration loading, because if there's something that you don't really use immediately after you start up Emacs, you can use this defer parameter with use package to make it load up later after you've sort of let Emacs sit for a second. I do this with mu4e so that it doesn't start syncing my mail until some amount of time after I finish loading Emacs. But it's not something you have to do all the time, but it can help you speed up your Emacs startup time if you use stuff like this. So that was kind of a simple example. Let me just check that there's anything else here. So if you are curious about the diminish thing, diminish is actually a package which will hide certain minor modes from your mode line. So I tend to use this so that I don't have so much stuff in my mode line to make my mode line more minimal. So if you use that diminish keyword, it actually adds a little bit of extra stuff here, which it looks for the function diminish to see if it's defined, which basically means the diminish package has been loaded, and then it will call diminish on the name of the whatever you give it here, basically. So you're diminishing the mode name, which key mode. But that's not really that important, and probably a lot of people aren't using that. Something I actually don't use anymore because I use a package called minions to just hide all of the minor modes anyway. That's why you see this little gear icon here, because I've just hidden all the minor modes to keep them out of view. All right. So now we have the first example of a use package that has a bind setup. And that's a good one because it's mostly just a bind expression. Let's see. Cateroo says, use package key mapping or general.el, which is better? I think general.el gives you a lot more power, and it also gives you the ability to create definers that you can use in multiple places. So if you want more advanced key binding facilities in Emacs, or I guess functions for more advanced key binding facilities, general.el is really, really good. But I think that use package, its own bind keyword, gives the functionality that's needed for most people, I would say. So if you're getting more complex with your key bindings, or if you're doing leader keys like in Vim or Spacemacs, then general.el is an obvious choice. And there's also an integration into use package with the :general keyword. So if you wanted to sort of use both together, you could actually do that. Anton says, I made my own Greek symbols for modes. I use not to pollute mode lines. So it's like 7 letters constantly. Yeah, that's definitely another way to do it. Some people put emojis or other single character symbols for that, which definitely can work. All right, so let's get rid of this window and then copy this IV configuration. And then I'm going to expand that one. So let's run Emacs list macro expand. Okay, so what we'll see is that there is a lot of Autoload stuff being set. And the reason why is because any of the commands that we're setting key bindings to here, I think it's assuming that they are commands and not just Emacs functions. And it is setting up Autoloads for all of those. And this is part of what use package is doing behind the scenes that you probably aren't aware of. Basically, it's making it so that if you use bind or hook or commands, it will defer the loading of your package until one of these things is actually used. So in this case, we're saying that we have this IV configuration. We're not saying anything about having it be deferred, but because we have a bind keyword here, we're setting up Autoloads and deferring the load of IV until one of these key bindings gets used. So it does all this list of Autoloads that it's setting up for all these functions we're binding things to. You can basically see the same list of functions down here. And then eventually we get to the eval after load for IV. And this part is for the config block that you saw before, which basically just calls IV mode. And then we have this call to bind keys. Now, bind keys is not something that comes with Emacs. It's actually another package that I think got merged into use package. If you look at the source for the bind keys function, it's actually a macro, and it's defined in bindkey.el. If we follow that, it sends us to use package. So Straight cloned the use package, and the bindkey.el file is actually part of use package. So you can't just take this code and then use it directly, but you could probably install bind keys separately and then use it like this if you wanted to. But it's definitely not something that comes by default in Emacs. So this expression looks basically exactly like what you had before, because it's really just mapping those things directly over. And what it's saying is that we're binding keys for the Ivy package. We have this global key binding for swiper, for Control-S, and then we have bindings for each of the individual key maps we want to add bindings to. So bind keys is really taking care of a lot of the work in this case. Since it's a macro, we can actually get a little bit crazy here and try to expand that and see what that does. And I imagine it's going to be a lot more interesting. So let's go here. Whoa, okay, shouldn't have done that probably. Let's expand this. All right, so now we got a lot more code, because this is what the key binding thing is doing. In fact, it's probably calling more. Is this another macro? Let's see. Control-H-F, bind key. Yep, that's a macro too. So let's expand that one. Whoa, even more stuff. That's a lot of code for just a single key binding. That's amazing. Let me try to get my bearings here. Key map. Yeah, it's got a lot of extra logic that's baked in here that is checking for things to exist before it actually tries to set bindings. So you see this nice, simple looking little bind section here, but it actually expands to quite a lot of code. And if you think about that in terms of the real amount of code that's being executed for this use package expression, if you were to write out all these bindings yourself using define key, it would be a lot less code to execute. So it might actually speed up your Emacs startup time if you use define key instead. Something interesting to keep in mind. The other thing is that it seems that that the bind keys function is actually not being called in eval after load, which does make sense because we're trying to bind some of the, or I guess we're binding all of these keys to auto-loaded commands. So this needs to be happening here. However, if you knew for sure that there are certain bindings you do not want to set until this package is loaded, you can't do that with use package, but you could do it writing your own custom key binding code. So yes, as Jerry and Pavel have noted, it's a lot of hidden code and this macros all the way down. So yeah, it's interesting to see this stuff actually be expanded out to understand what's happening under the hood. So let's see. Yeah, so it's just a lot of bind key calls and a lot of eval after load. And that's interesting actually that it's doing that. Let me actually try to understand what's happening here. So okay, so it's checking to see if that function is already loaded, if it's already defined, and if it is, then it runs the bindings immediately. Otherwise, it uses an eval after load on that, which is really, oh no, sorry, that's the key map. It's looking to see if the key map is defined. So that does make sense. It doesn't want to try to bind something that doesn't exist yet. So it waits until the Ivy package is loaded, and then it will check, it will bind the keys after the package is loaded. So that does make sense. All right, so definitely there's some room for improvement by writing things yourself if you wanted to go that far, writing your own key bindings. All right, what's the next thing we can look at here? So there's an after Ivy. We've already seen that before. We've already seen bind. We've seen custom. We've seen config. Custom, config, all that stuff we've seen. Some remaps here, which probably doesn't result in anything that different in the end. Defer, nope. Let's see, what else? A lot of stuff in org mode. Let's look for the next use package. Okay, so hook. Have we seen hook yet? I think this may be the first hook. Okay, great. Finally, we have a hook we can look at. Now, this actually has a lot of code inside the config block. Maybe I don't want to do this one because I don't want to see all that stuff written out. This is much better, I think. So let's use org bullets as an example for hook instead. So I'll copy this so we can see before and after. Run Emacs list macro expand. And we'll ignore all of the custom variable setting stuff here because it's a lot of boilerplate, as we saw before. But we can see here that all we're doing to add a hook is just calling the add hook function, which is really all that's necessary anytime to set a hook in Emacs. So if you know what the name of the hook variable is, which in this case is org mode hook, you just pass it in as a symbol to add hook, and then you pass in the symbol to the function or the reference to the function you want it to call whenever the hook is invoked. And I mean, you don't really need to have this line here whenever you have a single hook. However, if you want to start defining multiple hooks, then it does become simpler, I guess you could say, to use this syntax instead, because what it actually allows you to do is to set multiple functions that get called for a given hook. So in this case, we could say, let's see, auto revert mode or something like that. So I think you can set multiple hooks. In fact, let's see if that works. I'm going to use the macro expand. Yeah, so we can see that we're setting up the org bullets mode hook and the auto revert mode hook when we set multiple hooks there. And that's interesting. There's actually, why does it do it that way? So org bullets mode hook, org bullets. Huh. So because I added that, remove the custom part before expanding so we can focus on the essence. Good call, Tomas. Okay, so let's do that. It's interesting that it adds something extra that we don't expect. Let's expand that one more time. So last time, it only wrote out the org mode hook here. But this time, it also wrote out an org bullets mode hook to org bullets. Is it because I wrote something wrong in the configuration? Is that what happened? Let's see. Let's look at all instances of hook and see if we can find one that has multiple. Maybe I did get the syntax wrong. Okay, so let's look at my own configuration. Oops, let me click out of that one really quick. Emacs, and then colon hook. I must have one. Oh, is it the wrong way? Is that what I did? So for multiple modes, you can set one function that gets called. Okay, let's check the documentation for use package, just out of curiosity, because I might be doing something wrong here. So if we check the hook documentation, see /colon hook. So multiple hook variables bound to one function, but I don't know if it does it the other way. Maybe that's something I did wrong. Okay, so let's just go back to that example again then. So what we'll do is jump back to Emacs and then undo that. Let's go back here. And then we can add this instead. So org mode, and let's just say, I don't know, for the sake of something, prog mode. This is really wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway, just so we can see what the output is. Okay, so now I'm going to expand that. And now that we actually get the output that I was expecting to get, which is that for each hook variable that you're passing in, it gets bound to that output function. So it's really interesting what the output it gave us whenever I did it the wrong way. Because I don't know if there's a bug in the code or maybe there's some other behavior that I'm not really aware of, but it didn't seem right to me. But as you can see, the hook registration is very simple in Emacs Lisp. You're just calling the add hook function. If you want to remove a hook, you just call remove hook with the same parameters effectively. So there's not a whole lot of extra value in the way that the colon hook keyword works, except for the fact that you can bind multiple hook variables to a single function at the same time. So I don't know how often that comes up, because actually in my own configuration, I don't see it very often. So maybe it's something that you don't need in the end. And you could just use add hook individually like that. All right, so let's see, what else do we have that might be interesting? There's another hook instance here. I've already got some eval after load instances as well. Let me check that, because maybe I got that wrong. So file is, does it need to be a symbol? Huh. Maybe it does need to be a symbol. Anyway, these eval with eval after load that I had showed you before, those might actually need to be symbols that you pass in and not just the name of a symbol. You may have to put a single quote in front of it, and the reason why is because it seems that the macro is eventually trying to evaluate what you pass in, and it might evaluate the variable and expect it to be a variable when it actually isn't a variable. It's supposed to be a symbol. So that could be just a mistake on my part. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So what else do we have? Use package. That's all stuff we've seen before. I know there's one more thing in here we haven't seen yet. Commands, config. Here we go. So here's another thing that maybe you don't use very frequently, and probably if you have I'm guessing if you have a package that's written correctly, you don't need to do this in your own config. But I did this here probably to defer the loading of TypeScript mode, which I think the way that I have this formulated actually does it the wrong way. However, one thing you can do with use package is say that using the :mode keyword, you can say that for a given file path pattern or file extension pattern, trigger this mode. Anytime a file with .ts is loaded, trigger TypeScript mode. So if we expand this, and let me copy it first. If we expand this, we can see that it gets converted into adding that pattern to the auto mode A list. And that's probably something, I don't know if we talked about that before in any of the previous videos, but auto mode A list is a list of registrations of file name patterns that map to modes that should be activated whenever that pattern is, when a file with that pattern is opened. So for instance, anything with markdown or .md in it loads markdown mode. Anything with .gpg, which is like an encrypted file, gets loaded with EPA file to decrypt it. A lot of other things that are already registered there based on the packages that you have loaded or the things that are built into Emacs already. So this mode here basically just says add an entry for .ts that maps to TypeScript mode to this auto mode A list. Now, obviously, this is a lot simpler looking than what it actually comes out to be in the real Emacs Lisp code, but it's probably not that bad, and you could probably write a very, very simple macro to make it way simpler looking. Now, but then I guess we get back to the same question of, are you losing visibility into what's really happening if you start using macros again to simplify some of this stuff? And I would say there's probably a point of balance to be struck here with this specific example of auto mode A list. Probably you're not doing it very often in your configuration, so it isn't so annoying to have to write it out whenever you do need to do it. So having a convenience macro to simplify this probably doesn't help a whole lot. But if you find it ugly to do this, and you do have to do it a lot for some reason, then maybe you would want something to make that look a little bit prettier. And if you want that, just use package because it's very simple. You obviously have this :mode and then the regular expression to match that file pattern, and that's all you really need. Let's see, what else do we have here? I think that's probably it. Hook, custom, let's see, use package. Let's find anything else here. Bind, custom hook. Bind key map. That's interesting. I wonder what that actually binds out to. I don't use bind-key map very often because the bind keyword does a pretty good job of that already. I'm guessing it probably just calls into bind keys macro again. So I will expand that, and yep, it's just calling bind key basically, saying bind key control CP to this lambda, which we had passed in before. Actually, it calls into projectile command map. So yeah, nothing really that special or new there. And let's see, Magit, Forge, that's another bind, another hook. I think that's probably it. Let me check my my notes on this because I think that's probably all the examples that we had to look at. So commands, mode, hook, bind, defer, custom, config, and init, after, ensure. So let's see. So Pablo says, I'm curious, how does it extend after package 1, package 2? Great question. Benoit says, use package removes noise from the config. Yeah, it definitely can make things a little bit more concise. But the question I'm sort of asking us today is it really concise enough to be warranted? And, you know, after looking through all this, some of it is warranted for sure. All right, so we want to look at after with multiple packages. So let's find one that has a simpler after. Let's go back into this Emacs config. After. Okay, so that one's okay. Okay, that's great. So let's put here after LSP evil. And let's expand this to see what that does. It does basically a nested eval after load, and it seems to prioritize the rightmost entry in the list. So if you have evil to be the last one, it goes in reverse order. So that kind of makes sense actually, because what you're saying is this is the priority order of the packages that need to be, well, let's see. LSP needs to be loaded first, then evil, etc. So it goes reverse through this list to do eval after load. It checks evil first, waits for evil first, then waits for LSP, which in theory should be already loaded, but maybe not, and then calls require LSP tree max. So yeah, so it basically just wraps all those. I imagine if I add more, it's just going to wrap them more in these nested eval after load expressions. Let's see. Tomas says, if you're planning to do a lot of auto load and deferring, then it would be a huge pain to debug the imperative code without all of the checks for the existence of variables and symbols. I wonder. Because you're going to find out a lot more quickly if you write code that is trying to access a variable that doesn't exist yet. So I would think that you would get more immediate feedback if you did something wrong in your own sort of handwritten config. But yeah, what you say basically, well, I think it's still deferring executing some of these checks until after packages gets loaded anyway. Until packages get loaded anyway. So I think maybe you would end up with very similar code if you had written it yourself, if you were trying to guard against certain things. But maybe you wouldn't have to guard against everything, because obviously the generated code is probably trying to be very safe compared to what you might do if you kind of knew what to expect in your configuration. And if you had a problem that threw an error, if you had more clearly written imperative code, you would probably figure out where it was coming from faster than if you had to figure out what was happening in the generated code from use package. But I haven't had enough experience with debugging weird problems with use package to know that it would actually be a problem. Benoit says most of use package is data instead of code, less chance to break it. Well, the data does get turned into code. So if you configure something, if you pass the wrong symbol to something or whatever, you could end up with problems in the generated code. Tomas says it would be hard to find why something is not defined at a certain moment. Yeah, if something's not defined at a certain moment, what you would know is that you have a load order problem in your configuration. You could probably figure out why, because you would know what package has the variable that you're looking for, and if it's not loaded, then you know that something is wrong in your load order. Rotislav says, if somebody wonders why Emacs ignores the setQ TypeScript indent level, it gets overridden by project-specific editor config file. I don't think Emacs does that by default, though. You probably have to actually have the editor config package set up before it will try to load that up. Maybe you're using Doom Emacs that has that set up. What else was I going to look at? I think that was the last thing, right? Let me double check. Oh, yeah. So ensure T. I kind of wanted to see what the Package.el equivalent will be of installing a package, since we've been seeing the straight integration the whole time here. Let me try. Rodazov, you probably do have editor config set up by default in Spacemacs then, I would guess. So maybe I should, whoops, wrong. Maybe I should revert all these changes because, I mean, we don't really need to save these. I guess we could try loading up Emacs with a simpler config, but since we haven't actually finished all of the edits, it's probably a little unsafe to do that at this point. It's kind of a waste of time, I would say. What I want to do is, let's just stash these changes in case we want to go back and look at them again. And I will switch back to the master branch because I don't have Straight.el set up there. I'm pretty sure. So if I go back to master branch, then this should still have Package.el. Yes. So let's do the same thing. I hope this doesn't try to install a bunch of packages. If it does, we're gonna have real problems. Let me check DRED and see if there's a Elpa folder here. I think I deleted it. There is that though. I'll try this. I might pull the plug on this really quickly if it gives us trouble. What's the key binding I have set up for that? Control Alt. What the hell, man? Okay. In this configuration, I have key bindings set up that I've forgotten what they are, so I have to be a little bit more careful. So IV Alt done. Control L. Well, that totally makes sense. Is that the right one? What? Okay, let's try that. So I'm trying to rename this folder to Elpa. Control L. No. Come on, man. Control. Ah, jeez. Reload. Rename this to meta return. I tried that and it didn't work. Ah. This is no, it's not doing. Okay. E shell. Save me. Move Elpa back to Elpa. Okay, so let's exit this Emacs session. I'll go back to my vterm. Let's see what happens. Maybe it's going to be a big problem. No, don't auto update packages. Yeah, I don't want that either. Okay, so I think it's probably going to try to compile everything. Forget that. Let's see. What can I do to test this really quickly? Oh, maybe I just need to use ensure T. So let's try that. I'll go back to the folder we were in. Oh, IV immediate done. Thanks. Yeah, I missed that. E shell. I'll go to cd projects code Emacs from scratch. Emacs-Q, I wanted to use the config I had there, so I'm trying to avoid skipping it, but I think I can deal with that better. Let's see, git checkout. What's it? Git branch v. Git checkout. Use package demo. Okay, that's what. Git checkout init.el. All right, now let's go back there. Go back and load up the, okay, cool. So now I'm gonna go back into projects code, Emacs from scratch, emacs.org. And then instead of using straight, where was it? Right here. So I'm gonna set this to nil, because I don't want it to try to use, I don't want it to try to install by default with straight. I actually want to force it to use Package.el instead, just so we can see what it looks like. So I'm going to explicitly say ensure T right here, and then we'll run the Emacs macro expand. Okay, so now, okay, that's right. I had seen this before and I forgot what it was. So basically they have their own helper function called use package ensure Elpa. And they're using that instead of calling the direct Package.el functions for checking if a package exists and then installing it, because it takes more, it takes multiple lines of code instead of a single line of code, or multiple expressions, I suppose you could say. So let's look at the actual code for that function. So here, you give it the name of a package, and then, where's it go? Use package as symbol. What does that do anyway? When package, require, it's Package.el. Yeah, it's doing a lot of checks inside, and some extra stuff for like package pending, it seems. And then it finally checks package installed P for the package that you're trying to install, and then it will do some extra work to load up the package archive, which is interesting, and then it will eventually call package install. So it's got a lot of extra behavior built in, but ultimately it just boils down to these two lines. So if you were going to use that, you would do unless package installed, I think it's no littering, then you would say package install no littering. And that's what you would use to have the same behavior of trying to install a package that isn't already installed. So it is a little bit more code for the Package.el path, and that's sort of why I wanted to show the difference between that and straight use package. And if you remember what I said in the Straight.el video, straight use package has nothing to do with use package. I don't know why they picked that name, but I think they should have called it straight ensure package, because that makes it more obvious what you're doing. We're ensuring that this package has been installed. So, so for this reason, which is kind of a lame reason, I kind of like the usage flow of straight better, because there's just a single function you call to verify that a package is installed, and if it's not, install it. They could easily add a similar function to Package.el for that purpose that takes some of that same behavior from use package and then applies it to this same kind of check. Tomas says it's more error prone though, because check in unless can differ from the package install argument. That's true. It's possible, yeah. So, so what does this all come down to in the end? Let me go back to my notes here. So I feel like a lot of what use package is doing is stuff that Emacs could provide to us by default in box. To provide us with a little bit more cleaner syntax for doing some of these things, like doing multiple key bindings at the same time. You saw the bind keys macro that's part of use package. If something like that existed in Emacs, it would be a lot easier for people to do bindings across multiple key maps at the same time with one expression. And if it was something that's built into Emacs, then it doesn't really feel so bad as using something that's in a third-party package, because it's something that can be documented in the Emacs manual. It's something that's sort of a mainline piece of code that you would see in an Emacs configuration. So it seems more reasonable to have a macro for defining multiple key bindings in one expression as part of Emacs. So personally, what I would like to see in the future is for less of the functionality of use package be something that is particular to use package, and more of it be independent macros or helper functionality in Emacs that's an actual part of Emacs that you can call directly without having to load a community package to do that. The most obvious case for that is going to be key binding definitions. Another thing could be setting up multiple hooks at the same time, but as we saw, there's probably not so many cases where you would get a lot of value out of having some kind of helper macro for doing multiple hooks easily. Now, the case for custom variables, you could say that setting custom variables correctly in code is a foot gun. You could run into a lot of problems with that, or a lot of undesired behavior. So if there was a way to set them that more smoothly integrates with the configuration system or the customization system. So if you wanted to set some variables, some customizable variables in code, and then set some of them using the customization UI, and whatever Emacs did made it all work together nicely, that would be great. But based on what Pavel was saying before, it might be the case that if you use this custom set variables macro, I think it's a macro, then it might give you trouble if you actually do set variables in a custom file at the same time. So it would be nice to have something for that in Emacs, because if you set a custom variable using plain old set Q, you're going to skip some of the behavior that's necessary for some customizable variables, because sometimes they have hooks on those variables that cause things to happen whenever you set the value. And if you just use plain set Q, that stuff gets skipped as far as I know. So you kind of need a, excuse me, you kind of need some way for Emacs to be able to provide that for you, the ability to set that programmatically, but also have it to work correctly with the customization system in Emacs. Now, I had planned to possibly try to write a simple macro for binding multiple keys like use package does, but we've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to do that today. But it's something we could try another time. However, if you want to see an example of that, definitely just go check out bind keys inside of use package. There's also another example you can take a look at, which is, and it's kind of a little bit evil mode specific, but there is this evil, excuse me, define, let's see, check it from this way, evil define key. Is that the right one? Yeah, so evil define key will actually allow you to do something like this already. If you're using evil mode, evil define key, you can say for a set of evil states, you can have multiple key bindings that you're setting up for a particular key map. So that's another macro you could look at if you wanted to see how you might write a macro for binding multiple keys at the same time. In fact, we could just look at that really quickly. It seems, yeah, it's ultimately calling down to evil define key. So you might have to, excuse me, trace the code a little bit, but it's all in there if you wanted to take a look at how that's done. But obviously, macros are a little bit more of an advanced scenario, so maybe it's not helpful to look at that right now. But anyway, I feel like Emacs users would benefit if some of this stuff was provided in box so that it could be a standard part of how you configure Emacs and you don't have to resort to using third-party packages to do that. But that's my opinion. I'm sure other people might disagree. Let's get back to my previous window configuration. Firefox, there we are. Okay, so let's see. Pavel says, somehow I think that's how use package development started. Probably. I also feel the same, that a lot of what you see in use package, it started off as a simple macro and eventually gained a lot more internal checks over time because there's all these weird little edge cases that people didn't expect, or sequencing problems or all kinds of stuff like that, where use package had to have more internal logic added to account for edge cases and possible issues. So over time, things just got more and more complex, but it's complexity that has some value. As we see, some of these bits of the expanded code do stuff that would be hard for you to write yourself, like the custom variable setting and some of the key binding stuff. So obviously, use package has value. And if you like using use package, you should still use package. But if you are curious to see what your configuration would look like without it, you could follow the process that I used today. Use that Emacs Lisp macro expand, I think that's what it's called, excuse me, command to replace your existing use package calls with the expanded function code, and then just sort of clean it up and then make it a part of your configuration. So yeah, we'll definitely try to do a macro for binding multiple keys another time, but for right now, we'll skip that. Excuse me. I think we've reached a point in the stream where my voice is starting to annoy me, or my throat. So as far as the new configuration that I'm working on, I've been thinking a lot about, which we've talked about earlier in the episode, or earlier in the stream. I've been thinking a lot about the way that I covered Emacs from scratch from the beginning, and the fact that we used use package by default, without really explaining too much about why. I kind of wanted to make a configuration that does not use package, and also does a lot more things sort of in the box to start with, but then you could pull in stuff that is third-party packages if you wanted to. So I'll show that in more detail another time, but I'm definitely trying to think about how you could show someone how to build up a configuration from stuff that's in box in Emacs, and then eventually start pulling in things from the outside when we decide that what's in the box isn't good enough to cover our needs. Because there's more and more stuff being added in box in Emacs all the time. There's functionality now that if you like Vertigo, There's a iComplete vertical package that got merged into Emacs maybe a couple months ago that gives you similar UI. I mean, it's not the same. Vertigo is better in my opinion, but you still have the ability to have a vertical completion list that has a lot of the same properties as what you would see from Vertigo or Selectrum. And you have that inbox in Emacs. So as things continue to develop, as new things continue to be added into Emacs, things that sort of belong in inbox to start with, it sort of stands to reason that you would try to learn as much about what's already there first, then instead of going and just installing a bunch of third-party packages that you don't really understand what they do, and it just, bogs down your startup time even more, and, is another source of problems. So I feel like if I were to start over again, I would probably go with that approach. Do everything inbox and then gradually get to the point where I start pulling in things from the outside, including use package. I would not start with use package. Later, we'd probably bring it in if there were obvious cases where it would simplify the configuration and make it easier to understand. And I still need to look into this leaf package that Matto mentioned earlier. If you're interested in finding out more about that, let me just pull that up. To me, it looks very similar to use package in how the configuration blocks look, but Matto keeps telling me that it's different. So I don't know yet what the real difference is. But it's definitely worth looking at if you wanted an alternative to use package that might solve some of the problems that you have. So yeah, that's basically it for what I wanted to talk about today. I'm glad that we're able to stream again because I missed it the last couple of weeks. It's very cool to be able to have this time where we can talk about cool Emacs stuff and then interact directly with people as the stream is going on. Tomas says, let's macro expand a leaf expression. We'll do that whenever we talk about leaf probably. So yeah, so let me just go ahead and bump over to the sponsor screen. I just want to say thank you to all the people who are sponsoring the work that I'm doing, making videos about GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, etc. Some of them are here today, so thank you all who are sponsors that are here. If you're interested in sponsoring the work that I do on making these videos and these live streams, etc., definitely check out the links I have below in the description. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and on Patreon. I also have a link to PayPal for one-time tips. And if you're not interested in supporting in that way, the least you could do is click like on the stream and any other video that we post on the channel, and also share the videos with your friends so that more people can find them and we can have more people to come and indulge in our strange set of obsessions with all this Lispy goodness. So let's see, next week, I'm not sure what I'll cover yet on videos, but I have some ideas. If you have anything in particular you would like to see a video on, please feel free to leave them in the comments or let me know on Discord or IRC. Check out the links in the description to find out how to find us there. I think that stuff's there. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining, and until next time, thanks a lot for being here, and happy hacking. We'll see you.